Nuclear war, a topic that sends chills down our spines. But what if I told you that the decision to launch these world-ending weapons rests solely in the hands of one person?
Wait, what? You can't be serious. That's terrifying.
It is, and it's the stark reality Annie Jacobsen reveals in her new book, Nuclear War Scenario. She paints a chilling picture of what could happen if the unthinkable becomes reality. According to her research, a nuclear conflict could wipe out 5 billion people in just 72 minutes.
I don't even have words. It's hard to wrap your head around numbers that big. How did we end up in this situation?
Well, it's a long and complex history. Jacobsen traces the evolution from the early atomic bombs to today's thermonuclear weapons. And get this, modern nukes are not only significantly more powerful but also smaller in size. Some are over 3,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, yet small enough to fit in a truck.
Oh, that's not comforting at all. How many countries actually have these weapons now?
According to Jacobsen, there are currently 9 countries with nuclear arsenals. The US and Russia have the largest stockpiles, but China, France, the UK, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea also possess them. And while mutual assured destruction has been a deterrent so far, it's an incredibly precarious balance.
I can see why. With more players in the game, there's more room for misunderstandings or miscommunications. Does Jacobsen talk about any close calls we've had?
Oh, absolutely. She highlights several near misses throughout history. For example, in 1983, a Soviet early warning system malfunctioned, incorrectly showing that the US had launched missiles. It was only the quick thinking of a single Soviet officer that prevented a retaliatory strike.
That's terrifying. It really drives home how close we've come to disaster. So, how exactly does the decision-making process work in a crisis?
Well, that's where it gets even scarier. Jacobsen goes into detail about the nuclear football, a briefcase that's always with the president, containing authentication codes and strike options. In a crisis, the president could have as little as 6 minutes to make a decision between detecting an incoming missile and having to respond.
6 minutes? That's barely enough time to make a cup of coffee, let alone decide the fate of the world. Does Jacobsen offer any hope in her book? Any ways to step back from this edge?
She does, actually. She emphasizes the importance of public awareness and choosing leaders who understand the implications of their authority. But perhaps more importantly, she argues for a shift in perspective, viewing potential adversaries as collaborators rather than enemies.
That's an interesting approach. I suppose it's harder to consider launching a nuclear attack on someone you see as a potential partner. But how do you even begin to build that kind of relationship with countries that seem so fundamentally opposed to us?
It's a challenging process, but Jacobsen points to historical examples where it's worked. The gradual thawing of relations between the US and the Soviet Union during the later stages of the Cold War is one example. She also highlights more recent efforts, like the Iran nuclear deal, as steps in the right direction.
I see. So it's about finding common ground and shared interests. But what about the weapons that already exist?
That's where disarmament efforts come in. Jacobsen discusses various treaties and agreements aimed at reducing nuclear stockpiles. She also mentions the work of organizations and individuals pushing for disarmament, like Kuko Toro, a Nobel Peace Prize recipient collaborating with physicians and activists to promote nuclear arms reduction.
It's heartening to know there are people out there actively working towards a safer world. But I have to wonder, how do journalists like Jacobsen handle the emotional weight of this kind of work?
That's a great question. Jacobsen actually touches on this, discussing the emotional complexities of engaging with survivors and the challenge of balancing professional duties with human empathy. She recounts meeting survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings and how these interactions deeply affected her.
I can imagine. It must be incredibly powerful to meet someone who lived through such a devastating event.
Absolutely. Jacobsen describes how meeting a Nagasaki survivor deepened her understanding of the long-term effects of nuclear war. She talks about the survivors' ongoing health issues, the societal stigma they faced, and the generational trauma that continues to affect their families. It really brings home the human cost of these weapons.
Wow. It's easy to think about nuclear war in abstract terms, but hearing about the real, lasting impact on individuals and families makes it so much more real.
Exactly. And it's not just the survivors who are affected. Jacobsen draws parallels to those in the military or intelligence sectors who often have to suppress their emotions to do their jobs effectively. She talks about the psychological toll this can take and the importance of acknowledging these emotional impacts.
That's a heavy burden to bear. It makes you wonder about the long-term psychological impact on these individuals, doesn't it?
Indeed. But Jacobsen also shares an interesting anecdote that highlights the importance of seeing the human side of everyone involved in these issues, even those we might initially view as bad guys. She recounts interviewing a general involved in a controversial military program, expecting to confront him about ethical implications. Instead, she found a man deeply troubled by the moral aspects of his work, sharing his personal struggles and sleepless nights.
That's a powerful reminder. It's easy to dehumanize those we see as adversaries, but at the end of the day, we're all human, dealing with our own complexities and moral quandaries.
Precisely. And that's really the core message of Jacobsen's work. She's advocating for open, honest discussions about nuclear threats, emphasizing that confronting these uncomfortable truths is essential to preventing catastrophic scenarios. She argues that by recognizing our shared humanity and common interests, we can work towards more collaborative solutions.
It's a lot to take in, but it's certainly important. What do you think our listeners can do with this information? It's easy to feel helpless in the face of such a massive global issue.
Well, I think the first step is simply being aware and engaging in these conversations. As Jacobsen points out, informed public discourse can lead to meaningful change in nuclear policy and disarmament efforts. She encourages readers to educate themselves about nuclear issues, engage with their elected representatives, and support organizations working towards nuclear disarmament.
And I suppose being more thoughtful about our choices in leadership, given what we now know about the power vested in a single individual.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing our collective responsibility in addressing these global issues. Every conversation, every vote, every action towards building understanding rather than division counts. Jacobsen also emphasizes the importance of fostering a global perspective through travel, cultural exchanges, and learning about different cultures to break down the us versus them mentality that often fuels nuclear tensions.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on. A call to action, if you will, for all of us to stay informed, engage in these difficult conversations, and work towards a future where nuclear war scenarios remain firmly in the realm of fiction.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you all for